All those who are holding tickets outside will get in as fast as they can. I'm speaking not to you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm speaking to the crowd on the outside, who seem to be standing rather reluctant to come in, and we're going to start this very soon.
Welcome back to another episode of Worthy. I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And welcome back to 2022 and film. It's been a few weeks since we've been with each other. It's really exciting actually to be back in the same room without just texting each other for because of the holiday season and everything else that's been ensuing in the end of 2021. But it's a new year. It's a year of Worthy, which is pretty incredible. It's a pretty good feeling. How about you, John? How do you feel?
It feels great to be back. It was hard not recording episodes. The holidays and the Rona. It's been crazy out there, but it's good to be back. It's good to be back here, episode 22. I hope you guys enjoyed our top 10 and our holiday special. And yeah, I'm ready to dive into All the King's Men.
Yeah, very excited to dive into All the King's Men. So we're going to be talking about politics to kick off this episode.
Oh, yeah, don't change it immediately, just based on that.
Yeah, just riveting stuff. But politics in film is very important. I actually think that a lot of auteur filmmakers, a lot of young up-and-coming filmmakers, especially some new wave directors, like to use politics in their films to give a message, to go against the man, push it against the government. And what we're dealing with in All the King's Men is kind of one of those films where it battles against the normalcy of American democracy and American politics, but with a little bit of a twist. But we wanted to just talk about political cinema and kind of the broad term of politics in film. So is there anything that sticks out to you initially when you think about politics in film, when you hear that phrase, or just political cinema in general?
So I don't know if I have a direct definition when I think of, or even a direct film when I think of political cinema or politics in film, mainly because I personally don't seek out politics in my day-to-day. Obviously, we are running a movie podcast. We love cinema and we love TV and we love entertainment on screen. So usually, that's not for everyone to say that, politics is not a huge part of our lives. You can love film and you can love politics at the same, but I've always chosen to focus my time and energy on fiction in a way. And we're talking about a film that is fiction. It's not based off of anything real, but for me, I've never really dived too deep into political films. And even when I just hear of, someone, you ask me that question, I just think of kind of biopics about politicians, like J. Edgar Hoover or whatever that movie is called with Leo. I just think of these random films trying to sum up someone's life in politics and how good or bad or corrupt or how, underappreciated certain politicians are. And when I think of political cinema, I think of that balance you have to draw between not just a left and a right. I think of politics as being beyond just more than left and right opinions, but it's also about satisfying an audience and not splitting an audience. So it's very difficult in my mind to make a film that's political simply based on how much of the politics you want to show, how much of the light and the dark you want to show. And I think All the King's Men does that in an interesting way. But for you, Ben, how do you see politics? How much do you really engage with politics in general? And what do you kind of think of political cinema?
Yeah, I think that I know from my personal experience in college, I actually ran a satirical news show. So having that experience and using politics more for comedy, kind of lended the path to understanding it and also looking at the comedic aspects of both sides. And actually, if you think of recently, a movie like Don't Look Up has something to say on both sides of the aisle when it comes to partisan issues in American government. But political films, they tackle that though, because there is intention with whatever the director or the writer is trying to say, with how they're portraying something, with the messages they're trying to have come across into the audience, and whether the audience picks up on that or not is completely up to them. Because some movies will have different political agendas than maybe how they're actually showing it. And actually, if you use All the King's Men, for example, the film's director, Robert Rossen, he was at one point a communist, and actually leading up to All the King's Men, he got out of the Communist Party, but then he was also, he was called in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was sort of blacklisted from Hollywood just because he had that past. You think of another movie recent like Being the Ricardos, has a whole storyline about Lucille Ball and if she was part of the Communist Party, but Clearly, she's not trying to give a communist agenda. So people will take like whatever perspective that the director, the actor, the writer has, and they try to fit that into the narrative of the film or TV show, perhaps that they're viewing and taking in. And so there's always like that eye on a political film when it comes to politics. Like, what is the agenda that's trying to be portrayed and trying to come across, and whether that's successful or not is completely dependent on the filmmaker's talents. So it's certainly interesting, and it's kind of murky in some ways, and it's hard to really talk about because there are so many different perspectives in life. I think that film is the perfect place to talk about politics, but it's also the hardest place to talk about politics because usually people do try to hide it while using film.
I think you can use film a lot as like a debate. When I think of most recent political films like the trial of Chicago 7, and you wouldn't really outright think that's a political film, but it very much takes place in a courtroom, and it's all about social politics and very much of the time of the late 60s. I think I'm kind of forgetting.
Yeah, the late 60s.
But that's an interesting one where it really gives you a lot of different perspectives, and I think that's kind of like the struggle that you have with political films is like not only showing one side but showing multiple sides and making a film that's kind of applicable to everyone. And I don't always think that's necessary. I think there definitely should be films that are made specifically for one side or the other, and not even just about separating or segregating these two sides, but there's obviously going to be characters that have opinions that may lean left or right, and that's always kind of a struggle. And I think about it from like a writing point of view about how hard and how difficult that is, and maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't see it so much, and why especially nowadays where it's so hard to make a movie even in general, and especially a movie that goes to theaters, why we probably don't really see it very often is because it's one, very difficult. Two, if you want politics, you're just going to go to Twitter, you're going to go to your favorite news network, whatever it is, it's going to be quick and simple, and you probably care more about the current politics, if you do care about politics, than you would some old political story that's remade into a film, or some film that's kind of about politics. I don't really think there's that much of an audience for it, so I think we see less films of it today, but I don't really know like where politics really stands in today's kind of point of view and in culture. I feel like for what we see today, it's more in television. If we were to see anything political, like a TV show that FX makes about some political trial or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think it is difficult. You're right. It's hard because one, you have 2 hours to tell a story and to give a whole perspective, and you're also trying to make it entertaining at the same time. So for movies like All the King's Men, there are if you think about the trial of Chicago 7, I think another kind of the opposite of All the King's Men is like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Those all, you have to get the audience to believe and actually care about a politician and care about dealing with the ins and outs of politics. So it actually makes a show like House of Cards, although Kevin Spacey aside, that show is compelling in ways because it's like this really dark, twisted side of politics, and that's the in for that show. But then you think of like war movies, you think of like All Quiet on the Western Front, you think of The Best Years of Our Lives. Those have more to do with the soldiers and not the actual the politicians that are making the decisions that impacted them. So it's really hard to make successful political films just because, again, like it's art form, but it's also entertainment. So you have to be able to get the audience to give enough of a shit about it to keep watching, to stay invested while they're watching that movie. Is there any last minute thoughts you have about politics just in general in film?
No, I think it's time to dive deep into Stark Boy.
Yeah, I think it's time to dive deep and ask that age-old question: is All the King's Men worthy of the Best Picture award of 1949?
All the King's Men. The rise and fall of a corrupt politician who makes his friends richer and retains power by his populist appeal.
The story of the rise of politician Willie Stark from a rural county seat to the governor's mansion is depicted in the film. He goes into politics, railing against the corruptly run county government, but loses his race for county treasurer in the face of unfair obstacles placed by the local machine. Stark teaches himself law, and as a lawyer continues to fight the local establishment, championing the local people and gaining popularity. He eventually rises to become a candidate for governor, narrowly losing his first race, then winning on his second attempt. Along the way, he loses his innocence and becomes as corrupt as the politicians he once fought against. As he rises, Stark philanders and gets involved with many women, taking his PR man/journalist Jack Burton's own girlfriend, Ann Stanton, as his mistress.
Stark's son, Tommy, drinks to deal with his feelings about his father, eventually crashes his car, injuring himself and killing his female passenger. When Stark bullies Tommy into playing a football game, Tommy becomes paralyzed after a brutal hit. Stark, who has always dealt with those who got in his way by any means, begins to see his world start to unravel, and he discovers that not everyone can be bought off.
The story has a complex series of relationships. All is seen through the eyes of the journalist Jack Burton, who admires Stark, and even when disillusioned, still sticks by him. Stark's campaign assistant Sadie is clearly in love with him and wants him to leave his wife Lucy. When Stark's reputation is brought into question by Judge Stanton, Anne's uncle, he seeks to blacken the judge's name. When Jack finds evidence of the judge's possible wrongdoing a quarter century earlier, he hides it from Stark. Anne gives the evidence to him, who uses it against her uncle, who immediately commits suicide. Anne seems to forgive Stark, but her brother Adam, the surgeon who helped save Tommy's life after the car crash, cannot. After Stark wins an impeachment investigation, Adam assassinates Stark. The doctor in turn is shot down by Sugar Boy, Stark's fawning assistant. Having lost his respect for him, Jack tries to get Anne's agreement to find a way to destroy Stark's reputation, just as he dies.
All the King's Men was directed by Robert Rawson.
Written by Robert Rawson, based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren.
Produced by Robert Rawson.
Music by Louis Grunberg.
Cinematography by Burnett Guffey.
Film editing by Al Clark.
Art direction by Sturgis Carn.
All the King's Men starred Broderick Crawford as Willie Stark,
John Ireland as Jack Burton,
Joanne Drew as Ann Stanton,
John Derrick as Tom Stark,
Mercedes McCambridge as Sadie Burke,
Shepard Strudwick as Adam Stanton.
So that is the synopsis, ? Of All the King's Men. It's kind of
light.
Yeah, it's a really hard film, I think, to give a straight, just like, this is what happens without, like I guess you can just say it's about a guy who just goes bad while goes into politics, but to give like the actual details is kind of weird. And that's, I think, one of the film's ultimate faults, is because it's a very surface level story at its core. It's just, there it is. This is Willie Stark. He went bad.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more under it than just that, but I think when you look at the story, you could just see it as that. I think maybe why you have those feelings is how the film's kind of constructed, and we'll definitely go into how Rawson kind of like made the film, and a lot of people talked about his like documentary style, and people even said that there wasn't really even a script for this movie, which I just think there's no way that's true. Based on the lines in this film, based on the interaction characters have, there's no way all of this was ad-libbed this well, unless these are like some of the best ad-libbers that ever lived. But I think it's really due to the construction of the film, and how, doing a little bit of research, we learned that like this was a 3-hour cut originally, and they really kind of whittled the film down to about an hour and 50 minutes, and a lot of the scenes kind of don't really feel that connected. Like, we kind of jump a lot, and there's not really too much of a progression through time. We kind of use Jack's narration as like our guide through the film, and I think that's a good kind of place to start, where some people call this film like a political noir film, even though that's got to be such a small subgenre. But I know you personally don't think this is a noir film, and tell me about that and why.
Yeah, I don't. When I saw that people categorize this as a noir, I was like, are we watching the same movie? Because when I think of noirs, and you know, you're more into the cinematic art style than me, I think, when it comes to actual directing and creating a scene. But for me, noirs are more mysteries, more detective stuff. There's the use of lighting is really key, and this film had like really nothing technically special about it. The lighting is it's flat. It's pretty much always during the day. There are a few, like, the movie ends at night, but it's mostly during the day, with how all this, like, you know, is portrayed and showed. So it doesn't fall into that, like, those key, like, okay, like, that's what makes a noir film. But then you think about it deeper, and you think about, like, noirs are supposed to, you know, it's supposed to kind of get, like, bring you on this adventure and kind of, like, bring you along to different points that seem, I feel like, a little fantastical. And this movie doesn't feel that way. It just kind of it has a political agenda. It has a lot of politics to say, and I don't think that politics is really a place for a noir film. Am I missing something? Did you find it to be noir at any point? Because I just don't see it.
I think people just really say it based on Jack Burton's character, who's a reporter who comes in and he kind of gets swept up into Willie Stark's, political career. And I think people really say it's a noir film just because we open and we end the film on voiceover. He's like this kind of reporter who kind of gets brought into a crazy world, much like you see with a lot of noir films. But I think that's kind of part of the issues with this film as well, is that it doesn't really define who's our main character, because the film wants to focus on Jack Burton, but he's clearly not really that interesting of a character just from the jump. But the film is clearly also about Willie Stark, who's kind of shines, in my opinion. I think Broderick Crawford is magnificent in this film, and I really think he's deserving of the Best Actor award that he, spoiler, gets later on in the evening. And I just think he is like electric when we see him on screen, and he's really interesting of a character. And for me personally, this is one of those films that I think if you were to remake it, and we'll definitely talk about a remake of it, that there's potential here. It's an interesting story, and I love a good story about a person kind of like falling to grace and becoming someone who they kind of promised themselves they never would be. I find that really fascinating. But the film just doesn't really want to fully focus on it, but then it kind of does, and I think it's just kind of all over the place, which is kind of the film's biggest fault. But before we go into the remake or Broderick Crawford, I'm curious what you thought of John Ireland as Jack Burton, and did his character work for you? Did it like tie the film together well enough?
Yeah, so I always want to back up for like 2 seconds, because you brought up a good point about the perspective of this film and also its length and runtime. So starting with the edit, this film, I think it was like 250 minutes was like the original cut. Mm-hmm. And so it clearly shows that essentially from what researching is that Rawson just like took the key scenes and just took off the beginnings of ends and scenes and just left like the quote unquote meat of the scenes, and that was kind of it. And that shows clearly. So it's all clunky and put together. And what that then lends to is how this was adapted. It was adapted from a novel, which is from Jack Burton's perspective. And this movie tries to kind of switch that and makes it more Willie's perspective.
To a degree. It kind of wants both. That's my issue with it.
Right.
It wants it to be both.
Right. So it wants to be both. But so you're cutting out like a bunch of probably intros and outros of scenes that probably would have helped establish Jack's character. And so then that leads to my point about John Ireland and his performance as Jack Burton as very flat. There's like no emotion in his character. The only like emotion that he shows is when he throws his drink at his stepdad. And even then that feels very flat. It feels very just like I'm going through the motions. Like I'm supposed to act angry here, so I'm going to get in a more serious tone, and I'm just going to be angry at the stuff and just deliver the lines like this. And this is me. I'm Jack, and I'm going to be, Willie Stark's crony. And it just doesn't. So when so you have Broderick Crawford, who I'll say is the best part of the movie. When you have like that kind of performance and that level of it, with everybody else in the film that just is flat and has no emotion, it doesn't lend itself to be a conducive environment to be interesting, to be entertaining. It's just like, oh, okay, you like this is just there. It's just like things just happen in the movie, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, and like that's where the fault is, that the adaptation just isn't as strong as I feel like the novel probably is.
Yeah, it feels like they're trying to make Jack Burton have his own fall to grace and show how he's corrupted by Willie Stark and how his influence with liquor, and he's kind of seen constantly drinking at a certain point throughout the film as well. And you could kind of see their similarities, maybe why Jack stuck with Willie for so long throughout his political career. But I think you're right. He is really one note, and maybe because certain scenes of his were cut out, he's not really an interesting character. He kind of like falls into Stark's lap, and from that point on, he just kind of, he's trying to be there and have something to do, but there's really just not much for him to do. Most of the film is him just talking about Stark to Sadie Burke's character, or talking to Annie and trying to like help him dig up dirt. It's just not very interesting because we don't really see his character do very much. He's just kind of there basically trying to recap things for the audience that we missed, essentially.
Yeah, he's like the voyeur into the scene. And then when you have actually compelling storylines, like Willie has an affair with Jack's girlfriend Anne. He had you have that opportunity to deliver emotion is in a scene where Willie is completely drunk and he's running up the stairs and falls. Jack doesn't do more than he could. Like John Ireland could have put more into that performance, and instead it just falls very flat, and it feels like, oh, come here, Mr. Stark, like I'll pick you up and help you, and it's like, no, maybe get in his face and be like, you know, effing this, like you, well, I guess you couldn't say fucking in 1949, but you, whatever, just in your face, like yelling at him while helping him up and helping him through, but like being able to acknowledge and deliver that emotion that would be appropriate for like that story. And unfortunately, it just isn't there. So for overall, like this character that we're first introduced to in the movie in Jack Burton really doesn't lend itself to being anything more, you know, than just what it is, just being a narrator and part of the story. Like even the end of the movie, when he has this big, you know, when Stark dies and he's telling Anne that you have to remember what Adam did. You have to remember that he killed Willie because we have to fight against what Willie's legacy is. That's not even emotional.
No, because it comes out of nowhere, where you can kind of sense that Jack gets to a point where he's like, well, Stark has really gone too far, but we never see him fully declare like this has to end. Like there's hints to it when we get to like the end scene and everyone's rallying outside of the courthouse and they're kind of waiting for the announcement to be made whether he's impeached or not, and it's just not there. And I think it's probably because scenes were cut out and it doesn't really make sense. Like Stark dies and then immediately Jack is like saying to Anne that like they need to say, like, it just happens so quickly that you're like, I don't buy any of this. Like this dude just died and you were right there next to him. Like you wouldn't say this right away. Like there would be time in between this. So yeah, I think that's again due to just how cut up the film is, and it just doesn't really tie itself together for me very well.
No, it doesn't. And I kind of just want to talk about the last scene of the movie because I think that's actually the most tense part of the whole thing. And I want to ask this question is, what if it was Jack who shot Willie at the end?
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I think it really, you would have to like have Jack go into like a deeper spiral, maybe be like really drunk while like everyone's cheering for him and he's like clearly at a really dark place. But I could totally see that as like a potential reroute of this story for sure.
Like they stop Adam from shooting him, but all of a sudden Jack pulls out a gun and shoots Willie himself.
Kills him anyway.
That would have been more noir-esque.
Yeah, it would definitely end it. Like, I mean, in the film also would be more noir-esque if we just like open on Stark's death. Very much like
a Citizen Kane.
Yeah, or a Sunset
Boulevard.
Yeah, Sunset Boulevard, where we kind of open up and you're like, oh, well, why did Stark die? And then we get to the beginning of the film and it's like, oh, he's such a nice, awesome man. Like, so then throughout the film, you're just like, oh, like why would someone want to kill this guy? He just seems like a nice man who's trying to help people. So I think that would make it more noir. I think it would add a lot more drama. And yeah, if Jack was also the one who kind of like ended up pulling the trigger because he gets that corrupted by it, I think that's way more interesting for his character and the story in general.
100%. So even though we kind of just jumped to the end, let's kind of go back a little bit. Let's go to the beginning. And actually, let's start at the main title sequence because I think it's the first time we get like a true montage of over the title credits. Of any of the Best Picture movies that we've seen, I think it's the first time we actually see like a montage of stuff that's happening and actually does happen in the film in the beginning of it. Yeah,
that is true. I didn't think about that too much. I mean, I just think of like Rebecca now when I always think of like Best Picture opening credits, but that's not a montage. That's kind of just a slow introduction to the scene and the set that we're going to take place in. But yeah, that is really true. And that's actually kind of something that I like about this film a lot is some of its editing style and some of its montages. Like I love a lot of the scenes where we have Stark kind of like rallying up the people. It's a really quick pace and it feels very modern and it does feel like a documentary at certain moments, which reading about Rossen and his kind of career and especially for All the King's Men, he really wanted to make it feel grounded and realistic and feel like it's a really lived in world and almost as if it were a documentary. And I think that really comes through and that you're right. I didn't really think about that being the first montage, but I think there's some great montages honestly throughout this film.
Yeah, no, they definitely do a good job with quick stuff and kind of bringing you quickly through what's happening. This movie, it takes place over maybe like a 10-year period, actually.
Probably. You wouldn't really know that watching it.
No,
but
you wouldn't. You wouldn't, especially with all that football stuff in the middle of it.
God.
Yeah.
That's not even the middle. That's the last 30 minutes. Yeah.
Right. We'll get there. But okay, so we get dropped into this story. Jack is given this assignment to cover Willie, and he goes to Sonoma County, which is either in the South or it's in California, because I've seen palm trees, and then I've seen people describe it as the South. So I have no idea where this movie takes place, which I guess lends itself to being kind of a mystery on its own. So we meet Willie. He's this good old boy. He's just trying to, get everyone to realize that the county's not really looking after him. They should vote for him as county treasurer. So there's a good intention there. He gets his law degree. There's something really wholesome about it. People call him, the rural Abe Lincoln?
Yeah,
I think that's what they call him, which Abe Lincoln was rural himself when growing up. So I don't even know why.
It just doesn't make any sense.
that just doesn't make any sense at all. But we start to see Willie get slightly like, oh, why are they not listening to me? But he doesn't get angry about it, and he only gets angry about it. And I've seen this movie now 3 times, and each time I've tried to figure out what is it that really turns Willie. What is that turning point?
Oh, I'm very interested to hear what you think, because I think there is not a specific, but there's something that is to his turning. But yeah, go ahead.
Alcohol.
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
That's it. That is absolutely it.
Yes, but also no. In my opinion, why I think this film works for me in a way is that it does feel surface level, like the way you described in the very beginning, and it is very much alcohol is what changes him as a person. And I think we'll definitely get to that first scene where he's calling everybody Hicks, and it's like really the first transformation that Stark has, or Crawford does as Stark, where he really kind of changes his personality so much, even though he's the same man and he definitely has these same intentions, but they kind of get twisted and morphed. But for me, it's not just alcohol. He is very adamant about not drinking in the beginning, and I think it's his wife at the time who's like also like, no, not drinking. And it's not because he has a bad past. I think he's just an honest man who knows like drinking is bad. He's probably seen it. I mean, I'm reading a lot into this as well, but it's the point where he gets kind of pushed drinking, and I think maybe it's even Jack who's kind of like pushing drinking onto him, just kind of like let loose after losing. And when he starts to drink and he goes on stage in that really like grandiose performance that he has, he becomes like a different person to me, and he becomes like this person that he like almost wishes he always was, and the person that doesn't care about what anyone else thinks, the person who's loudmouth and is going to say whatever he thinks is right in order to grab and gather people's attention. So for me, Stark is not consumed by alcohol that leads into this. He's consumed by like this person that everyone seems to love, and he's just like trying to catch up to that person based on alcohol, and like being drunk kind of like lowers that filter for him. I mean, that's the way I saw it. I may be reading into it so heavily, but that's why I think why for me it's not as surface level.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair to say, but again, like I think that's also, I would actually say that still is surface level, because he is just buying into, oh, that's how people want me to be.
Yes,
in a
way.
And I don't think like he really, I don't know what his political agenda really is. He just is yelling at people just to be mad and be angry.
No.
Which, you think of like movies like Network is like that, but then you also think of real life and how closely like this feels to real life with Trump and his presidency, and also how scary that is, that because some people just love, I guess, anger and loudness, and the fact that actually worked in reality, and that's why like watching this film, it feels a little too real at times. You're a little turned off by it. At least for me, I was turned off by it because of that. So but that's why, like, for me, finding out like why he turned, and it was really just because of the alcohol. It's like, okay, I guess that makes sense, but also that's not compelling enough for me to truly believe it.
No, and I think what I said, and being more than just the alcohol, and being kind of like the person that he becomes on alcohol, the person that he like kind of falls in love with himself, and that's why he kind of goes down this spiral. I think that could have been shown more. I think we could have had more conversations about his drinking, about like how he's changing over time. But for me, I was still just kind of like fascinated by this, and it's funny hearing you describe it as kind of like terrifying, because to me it was like fascinating. It was like, holy shit, like I did feel so much and see so much Trump in Willie Stark, and how he kind of like gathered up a crowd and how eventually he's like telling people to beat up people in the crowd. And like, it wasn't like scary to me in the way. Now, if this was like a modern film, I think I could see more of that. But for me, it was like almost a fortune teller, where it was like, I couldn't believe this is a movie, and a movie that's this old, that is like telling a story that feels so modern in a way that like we still see this day to day, and we like see public people that are heroes to us kind of like fall and become different. But to me, it was like fascinating, because I was like, I can't believe this is how accurate this is. And it feels like Trump watched this and it was like, this is exactly how you do it. Like, you are loud, you're an entertainer. That's how you win in politics. And I don't think that goes for everyone, but for someone who's like Trump, and, you know, we're not going to get into very much like certain details about politics. And I heard you just said that it's kind of like a critique on the film, that they don't really go too deep. And maybe it is because you don't know kind of Willie Stark's point of view on politics. But at the same time, I don't really think you need to. I think the film's not really about specific politics and arguing back and forth between it. It's more of just like what this industry can do to people, what alcohol does to people, and, you know, what all of these like yes men around you can like kind of corrupt you as a person. So it was interesting. I could totally see why you would say that about Trump and how it's kind of scary and intimidating, but I think that's because we've experienced that firsthand, and it's definitely hard to not see that when you watch this movie.
Yeah, so I want to read like the first like big speech, or well, not the whole thing. It's pretty chunky, but I want to read the end, because this is where it feels like the most Trump-esque in the film and the performance and the character, because it feels like that's exactly what Trump did, was trying to alienate blue collar, you know, working class, lower class people. So this is the end of Willie's speech he gives like at a county fair. He's definitely hungover, probably had a little alcohol before he jumps onto the stage to do this. So this is the end of it. So he goes, "Now listen to me, you hicks. Yeah, you're hicks too, and they fooled you 1,000 times, just like they fooled me. But this time I'm going to fool somebody. I'm going to stay in this race. I'm on my own, and I'm out for blood. Now listen to me, you hicks. Listen to me and lift up your eyes and look at God's blessed and unfly blown truth. And this is the truth. You're a hick, and nobody ever helped a hick but a hick himself. I'm the hick they were going to use to split the hick vote. Well, I'm standing here now on my hind legs. Even a dog can learn to do that. Are you standing on your hind legs? Have you learned to do that much yet?" And it gets people really going in the movie. And watching that the first time, I was like, okay, all right, like that's interesting, because I'm like, okay, he's really getting people. I thought it'd be more a movie about getting people to not rebel against American democracy, but to look to seek to change it. But this just felt like we're just going to follow Willie until he's the fucking king of the country.
Yeah, because these people are like, wow, this man is like actually telling the truth. And I think it's impossible not to talk about Trump, because that's what people loved about him. I mean, he was an entertainer, and he was someone who just was not afraid to say exactly what he wanted to say. But what's so interesting and so different about Stark and Trump, when we kind of compare the two, is that Willie Stark comes from the same background as a lot of these people. You know, he like is hick, as he says, and he's from that, and people understand that, and that's why people kind of probably rallied behind him from the beginning. But it's not until this point where he kind of snaps and kind of loses his cool and really says what he's probably always wanted to say, kind of running for office, and blows up on people. And you could see that in Trump. Like, Trump knows exactly what to say. He acts very down to earth. But I mean, the guy grew up as a millionaire. He was just handed money as a kid, and he's so far removed from the lower middle class America that kind of helped him get into presidency. So it's really fascinating to see the similarities, but also see how different it is, but also how that didn't really matter for Trump. People still bought it because he was just real. He was not up there like droning on about politics. People don't really give a shit about politics. They just want to care about the person that they're going to vote for. So,
which is what happens in the movie.
Which is exactly what happens.
Because Willie tries to talk about, that the county needs different tax codes and this and that, and just people were walking away. But it wasn't until he was being very boisterous and very loud and in people's faces that's when it became important. And actually, before he even makes this turn, Jack writes about Willie, and he talks about how he's a voice in the wilderness and how he's this person that people can look up to because he's so different. And this isn't from one of the things that Jack writes at the beginning. He says, in a state ridden for years by corrupt politics, the appearance on the scene of a man who is a politician yet dressed to oppose the political machine is indeed a rare phenomenon. Willie Stark is such a man. He is much a part of the backcountry as the very sun-scorched hills. He truly represents the people. And then his stepfather, Jack's stepfather, kind of says, you can't write this stuff. Like, this will incite people. And it almost feels like the articles you would see today that it does incite people. This like biased news, this news that people get that has an agenda that is there to poke questions at you, to elicit anger and elicit violence, rather than actually make you care and make you want to change. It's just being like, I'm angry at the world.
I think that's what gets people going more than anything. Like, people aren't, it's weird. People aren't going to come back for something that makes them happy as much as they will come back to something that makes them angry. I think looking at social media and specifically Twitter, like, there is a reason why people are addicted to Twitter. It's because not only are you just constantly sharing your opinions, but it's just filled with negativity. Like, you want to go on there to rip someone else, or you want to go on there and shit on someone else's opinion, or show how your opinion is more right than someone else's. And I think when you get that from Willie Stark, it just kind of ignites in people, and people want that. They come back to that the same way that it's so hard not to keep comparing Trump, but there's like so many similarities to him as a person, and this isn't even has anything to do with politics, but just really how he ran his campaign, how he was as a human being is so similar to Stark that it's kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah, this is one of the lines from the movie, very Trump-esque. If you yell loud enough and long enough, people will start to believe you.
Which is so true, and it's exactly what he does in the film, and it's what kind of grabs people and spirals them up. I just don't think I just wish we spent more time with Stark and really got to like dive deep into his psychosis and learn more about his character, because that is really the most interesting thing here in the film, and I just wish that we had more of that and more of kind of like a back and forth with him and maybe knowing more about his upbringing. But,
so is that more on the writing or the directing, you think?
Well, I don't know, because it sounds like this movie was so much longer and it had so much more than what we've seen, and I mean, maybe it comes down to the directing and the writing, because you've established that Jack is going to be our guide, much like in the book and the novel, guide us through this film, but it's also on the direction side to make Jack an interesting character, but also on the writing side to make him an interesting character and kind of like develop his character and have him involve more, and it just doesn't. He kind of like falls flat, and he doesn't have enough involvement for me overall.
No, he really doesn't have much. And then when he does, it's just, a montage of him playing tennis and fishing at Burden's Landing with Anne, who is his supposed girlfriend, but yet she takes the opportunity to run away from him pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, he has a lot of conversations with Sadie Burke, played by Mercedes McCambridge, which awesome name, by the way. But that is a really interesting relationship, and we should definitely talk about Sadie. It's just that her character doesn't really go anywhere, and her character has confrontations with Jack, but they just kind of end. Like, there's that blowout scene, which probably gets her the Oscar, with Jack, where Jack like slaps her and the scene just ends. Do you remember this scene?
Yeah.
It's just like, it's a really intense scene, and there's like great lines of dialogue, but then the movie ends, and it's like they never address it. Like, that kind of like continuation between them kind of just ends at that point. I don't know. She kind of comes in and out of the film constantly, and that's probably due to the edits they made.
So you like her performance?
I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's like best actress or support. I just don't think it's like a worthy win. I mean, I could see it nominated. She's interesting. Like, she's definitely a compelling female character, but at the same time, all she really does is just kind of like fawn after Stark, and it seems like her character is going to have more and more to do, but at the end of the day, it's just her being angry at Anne or Lucy because she doesn't have Stark. She kind of becomes a one-note character by the end.
Right, and especially for a character that I feel like is not meant to be, butch, but is meant to be a little more masculine and a little breaks out of that feminine role and is into politics, has her hands in the dirt. The thing she cares about is that Stark doesn't notice her, and it feels like there should be more to you. It feels like that you should care about what he's saying, she probably would support what Willie was saying, but it doesn't seem consequential to her at all. It's just like, I want him to sleep with me. I want him to notice me.
Yeah, there's something about this film where maybe it was just Hollywood at the time, where it feels like the need to involve sex, even though there's not really much showing. There's maybe not even a single kiss on screen. Maybe there is, but it's just very limited in terms of what they show, but it still wants to be about relationships and the women Stark has or wants, or how Sadie like looks at Anne and she's like, oh, she's so beautiful. Like, I see why Stark would want her. And it's like, why are you making this character who's like strong and compelling and who's someone who's like pushing Stark up the ladder and like actually helping his career and is like a strong female character who then kind of ends up only fawning after this person, and that's all her character really is by the end of the film. And that's probably, again, just due to how much they chopped up the film, and probably a lot of her scenes, you know, being in politics or actually helping the campaigns were probably cut just because they're not really that apparent to our main characters or important to our main characters.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, she gives those, you know, great, you know, they're not very long monologues, but she has some good monologues when she's talking to Jack, and you can definitely see, like, okay, like that.
She has her big energy, her, you know, really intense performances. So that's probably why.
Yeah, she should have been in it more. But speaking of kisses, there is a kiss that I've noticed that I laugh at every time.
Which kiss? Remind me.
So it is. It's when Jack and Willie are at the Stanton house, and Willie is, you know, trying to get everyone to vote for him and get the Stantons involved, and Anne's there. And Anne is just like smitten with Willie. You know, maybe it's some kind of Tony Soprano type thing where they're really just attracted to the power.
Yeah, it's like the way he commands a room. I think his presence, kind of, you know.
Right. So as they're all leaving the house, I don't know if you noticed this, but in the background, and it's established more in the back, but Jack is the one that's talking, and he goes to kiss Anne, but she moves her cheek, like she moves her face to the side, so he just kisses her cheek.
Yes,
and then she's looking at Willie. That's like the only kiss.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Anne and Jack do kiss at one point, but that was like one kiss that's like, oh, okay. Like,
yeah.
Like that was like a good direction. I actually think. It's on the nose, but it does get you right into it. Like, oh, she's smitten with Willie. But then the whole Anne and Willie thing just makes no sense to me at all.
It honestly is really confusing. I get kind of lost on who he's dating at certain times and like how long Anne's in the picture. It honestly got confusing. And I watched this movie twice too.
Yeah. Do you think there was probably a scene that got left out of like Willie going out and partying and like girls sitting on his lap and him being like, "Come here, sweetheart. Like, I'm Willie Stark."
Maybe I don't. Maybe that like crosses the line for his character too much. But it definitely felt like.
But that's what
he was that kind of person.
Right.
Yeah. No, they like allude to that, but they like don't fully commit on kind of showing him as that person. And that's kind of some of the issues with the film as well. It's like we show his descent, but we don't like dive deep into it. Like all we get in his descent is like him going to Jack and be like, "Oh, you know dirt about this guy?" And he's just like, "Oh yeah, I can figure out some dirt about this guy." And he's like, "Cool, do it." Or like someone will say in the newspaper or on the TV, they'll be like, "This person got murdered," and then everyone will look at Stark and he'd be like, "Oh, that's a shame. Like clearly he set up and caused this person to die." And there's definitely like showing how dark he gets, but it doesn't like allow him to dive deep into it. Like maybe it gets to a point where like Stark himself has to murder someone and like gets to a point where it's like really messy like that. The same way I think you mentioned early on with House of Cards and how that is about murder. And I think that's why people really love that show, is because it's not just about politics. It's like the most political show since like West Wing, but it's about real life things that you can relate to. And I think more of that in this film, I think, would have really strengthened his overall turn and made it like more dramatic, because it kind of just happens out of nowhere for me, really.
Right. And yeah, like that's the biggest issue with this film is like it's all in the editing. Then for me is because there's so much that feels left out, and there's scenes that just happen and just end so quickly that it's just it's hard to like really get into it because it's happening so quickly. Because then all of a sudden you're dealing with scenes where it's just about, again, like we mentioned before, the last half hour is about, you know, Stark's son Tommy, who's a football star, who then gets into a car crash and then is paralyzed. But it's like, I really don't care about this.
It's interesting, but it's like that has nothing to do with the story. I think they were trying to show like how dark Stark really is. I mean, they get to a point where he's arguing with Lucy or Anne, I forget who it is, and saying like how he really doesn't care about himself, like he should care more about like what his son thinks of him than what he thinks of his son. And I guess they're kind of going for that, where they're kind of show how dark it is, but it ends up taking up a lot of time in the last act of the film, and you kind of get lost. You're like, wait, what is this movie about? Like now it's about his family and his son, and like his son gets paralyzed, and then like I don't think you see him for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, he's just
so it's
kinda
like, why even
brooding,
include this? Like, why?
Yeah, again, it's just to show that Willie's descent into madness and philandering, and that he's not the good old boy that he was at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
But that could have been tackled so much. Like, it could have been tackled more efficiently, and could have used screen time in better ways, and we could have had more time with Jack. But then all of a sudden, we were like, there was like emotional scenes or heightened drama with Willie and Tommy arguing with each other in the locker room. And Jack's just there. Like, why is it Jack that's always there?
He's just always, he like knows everything, which I think is an interesting thing about the story too that could have been done better, is like Jack maybe like turning things on Willie, and like him knowing so much about Willie's life, like he could maybe start manipulating him or getting even information from Willie to help his like opponents maybe. Like, it's clear that they're trying to show Jack as kind of like having his fall to grace. And then they try to kind of wrap it up at the end where he's just like, no, like we have to tell everyone how bad Stark was, like, which is so out of like left field when it actually happens. But you're right. There's so many scenes with Jack just kind of like standing around and like, this is our protagonist. He's just kind of like here watching, listening. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. But before we move off of Tom Stark, there's no way we can talk about this film without talking about the amazing shot, which is where he's driving drunk with the girl in the car. And there's this like crazy quick like dolly or movement on tracks of the camera from one lane to the left lane to the right lane as the car drives by, which is like so different and stylized from the rest of the movie. It really caught me off guard. You noticed that, right?
Oh yeah, that was the only interesting shot in the whole movie.
Okay, I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's the only like stylistic shot.
What?
I would say, you know.
All right, so pause for a second. Is there actually a shot in the movie that you're like, oh, that was great?
Well, it's hard to say because it's clear, like we spoke a little about how Rossen was kind of trying to make this feel like a documentary. At times it feels like a newsreel. So it feels like the style he's going for is what we see on screen. It feels naturalistic. Like, it's not as dull as just like a camera set on sticks, just there watching people talk. Like, there's definitely movement in scenes. Like, we're following some characters here and there. Like, it's definitely not the most dynamic film we've seen yet, but I do think there's like some pretty shots of nature, and I really like the montages they have with speeches and how they're kind of like transitioning and fading into like multiple shots of his face. So I do think there's like visually some interesting things happening, but that's definitely the most stylistic shot. And I don't know if you can hold the rest of the film against it, because it does feel like they were going for that kind of style. So it's challenging. It sounds like you found it pretty dull though.
Yeah. So the car driving on the road and the camera dollying over it, that's really cool, and it's this really quick scene. It felt like they sped up the film just to make it seem like they were going way faster than they actually were. But yeah, no, I found this movie to be pretty dull. When we talk about like newsreels and montages, one thing that, and we talk about like compared to Citizen Kane, which is not fair to compare to Citizen Kane. It's not fair to Citizen Kane itself. But when you think of Citizen Kane in the beginning, they have this whole montage of his life and all that, and it then cuts right to all the journalists in the room watching it, and they're all smoking. That's a really cool shot. Like, that's like really interesting. And there's never a moment in this movie where it, like, you have all these large crowds, and you could have had so many different dynamic shots. Could have had these overhang shots of the crowd of just people. You could have had played more, if you really want to talk about fascism, played more into Willie talking in front of these crowds, had him more higher up, similar to like a Hitler. But it's just not there, and it's just these close-ups on Willie's face, and I guess like that is very newsreely, and like if like that's how you want to define the style, then sure. But then at the same time, again, when I talked at the beginning about this being considered noir, how does that then all fit together? Like, how do people watch this movie and then say that's a noir, where noirs are dynamic film shots? It's dynamic lighting, where this has no dynamic lighting. There's nothing technical about it that really wows you, and I think it shows because it didn't get any technical awards. The film editing is the clunkiest part of the whole thing, and so just to me, it just falls flat in all those areas that are really important, especially for a Best Picture winner, which we've talked about how it should further the art.
Well, that's interesting, because I kind of feel the opposite, where I do feel like this film and some of the cinematography does further the art, because to me this film feels way ahead of its time. And in the same way, I think we mentioned Don't Look Up, and Adam McKay directed that, as well as a bunch of other Will Ferrell comedy movies and Vice and a bunch of great movies. But he has this very particular style now, especially when he got into more dramatic films, where it does feel like there's just a cameraman in the room who's just kind of like trying to capture everything. And to me, this kind of feels like a prelude to this, and maybe he was a fan of Rosson's work, and this is kind of what inspired him. And this does feel, I think this comes from Italy, where we were kind of getting more intense films that are kind of more documentary driven, and we're getting all into French New Wave and some of that inspiring America as well. I think that's not until really later on in the 60s, though. But I think with Rosson, like it does feel like he has this particular style that's trying to feel cinematic in a way, but also feel like you could be watching this on TV, like as it's a news channel. So I could also see that kind of inspiring directors like Adam McKay, who have this very like loose style where they kind of like build the movie in the editing room and it kind of gets broken down from there. So I don't know, like to me, this is, in a way, it is kind of ahead of its time, that I do appreciate it because of that. But I could also see on the same time it is kind of dull in terms of its cinematography. It's not like as fun and stylistic as, personally, I like to enjoy films that are more, bigger and grander and have this much more dramatic feel to them. But I do have to kind of appreciate his style here. Is there anything else you really want to dive deep into All the King's Men, Ben?
I think just a big overall thing, I want to go back to the script, because there's a lot of, I think that the writing is actually really good, and it may also just because it's from a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, but at the same time, I think the script and the lines are good, and like that's what makes it fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's the message. Well, I don't even know if there's a message, so I shouldn't say that. It's the tone, and it's what the result of what happens in the story, and then again, like how it feels so close to the reality that we live in now, is what's kind of horrifying about it, and not in a good way. It's just horrifying, like, oh my God, maybe Trump did watch this movie and was like, that's how I'm going to get people to like me. I'm going to be loud and boisterous like that. So I think the screenplay has its merits, and spoilers, it didn't win for best screenplay, and I think I wouldn't have been upset if it did, but I don't think that it does exactly what it could have done.
Isn't it odd that people say that there was no script involved in here and that he only let the actors read it once, and then like that is rumors that we keep finding when we like look up about this movie. There's just no way that's the case.
No.
Like the lines they read are clearly definitely written lines. They're speaking way too concise and to the point of the actual film that there's no way they were just making up these lines as they went along. So I think there is something to that, and it's kind of impressive how much this movie was probably chopped up and ripped apart, but still maintains that storyline, kind of dragging us through. But yeah, I don't really, it almost feels like you find this, offensive is a bad word, but like it almost like this film is painful for you to watch in a way, because of like its allegories to what we've seen happen, and not just Trump, but just like politics and how like dark and how much they really kind of change and manipulate people. And I think that might tie into John Wayne as well, and how you had similar thoughts to him, right?
Oh yeah, so John Wayne was offered the role of Willie Stark initially by Robert Rosson. So the story is Rosson sent a copy of the script to Wayne's agent, who forwarded it to Wayne. After reading the script, Wayne sent it back with an angry letter attached to it. In it, he told his agent, Charles Feldman, that before he sent the script to any of his other clients, he should ask them if they want to star in a film that smears the machinery of government, but for no purpose of humor or enlightenment, that degrades all relationships, and that is populated by drunken mothers, conniving fathers, double-crossing sweethearts, bad rich people, and bad poor people if they want to go ahead. Wayne accused Rosson of wanting to make a movie that threw acid on the American way of life, and if Feldman has such clients, Wayne wrote that the agent should rush the script to them, because apparently they would have been more appreciative of this stuff that would have smeared American democracy and all that. And he also said, you can take the script and shove it up Robert Rosson's derriere. So I think that there is kind of a point to this, that this movie does intentionally poke at American democracy and tries to make it, and I think like a movie like Don't Look Up is actually a perfect thing to talk about. It tries to make it so dystopian and so like, look how bad everyone is. And it's like, okay, well, if everyone's just bad, then why is this good? So I like that's just how I feel, and I feel like I feel like that if a younger version of me had watched this movie, I think I would have been more compelled by it. I think I would have felt that this is interesting, that this is worthy of something. And then now watching it, and maybe it is because of the Trump experience, and maybe it is because I'm older and I'm a bit, I'm not going to say wiser, but I'm a bit more attuned to society and to people, that I look at it, I'm just like, this is not the way you should be approaching things. This is just, again, just because you're being loud, like, yeah, people will believe you, but at the same time, doesn't mean that it's right.
It's interesting, though, because isn't that kind of what the film's going for? Like, isn't this film kind of showing you how bad it can be and how to avoid this and how to read more into your politicians and to not elect people like Stark?
But where's the moment where, the only moment where it says that we can avoid this is literally the last minute of the film where Jack is shaking hand. It's like, we have to, go on. We have to tell this story. And it's like, is that really the moment that really should change it? Or maybe I should have had Jack say it to her in the middle of the fucking movie.
Yeah, or like before he actually gets murdered, because then it's kind of more powerful. Because it doesn't really make sense if he's dead and they're like, we got to reveal. It's like, who cares what he did? He's dead now. Like, he can never be elected again. He can't murder anyone else. So, like, why does it matter if you reveal how bad of a person he is? He's dead.
Right.
Like,
and
you're
like,
only hurting his family who did nothing, Yeah,
like you could have had a storyline where Jack was like leaking stuff to the press about him, and like, so you have that aspect. And then again, I think it still would have been interesting if Jack was the one to pull the trigger, because the whole end of the movie is it builds up and you see just Jack walking through the crowd. He doesn't really say much to anyone. He's kind of just sitting and waiting for this impeachment. It's like verdict. It's not even a trial. It's just this verdict to end if Willie's going to get impeached or not from his governorship. And if Willie was then at the top of the stairs saying, like, thank you to everyone, and then you see Jack and he just pulls out the gun, that would have been like, whoa, wasn't expecting Jack to be the one to do that, because the whole time you're waiting for Adam to show up to do something. So, like, that's where I think it could have been more compelling if Jack, and they didn't do that, is if he had more emotion and more purpose in the story rather than just being a fly on the wall.
Sure. I totally agree with all those points. I'm going to say something that's probably going to annoy you, because to me, this film kind of reminds me a lot of Scorsese. And if we want to pick out a certain film that's obviously much, much better film overall, like Goodfellas, which Goodfellas represents, and this gets construed a lot, especially like with Wolf of Wall Street or Goodfellas. And when you watch Goodfellas, it's really entertaining because like you love watching this gangster and you like see all the things he can do, but you also see how corrupted he becomes and how like dark that path takes you on. So when you watch that movie, you're like finishing it, you're like, wow, that was so entertaining. Like everything technically was amazing about that film, but like what do you get out of it? Do you get that, oh, like this is awful, like maybe organized crime like should not exist at all because look what it does to people? Or is it like a Wolf of Wall Street where people look at that and Goodfellas and they're like, oh my god, like he's the man, like that's exactly who I want to be, like I wish I was in the mafia? And I think this film is similar in that way, where I think you could see it both ways, where you could look at this film and be like, this is an allegory of how bad politics are and how they can kind of corrupt you. But you could also look at it as your way, where you're like, you could watch this and be like, oh, that's how you win in politics, and that's how you like get to be the top of your game. So what do you think of that?
That doesn't annoy me. If Scorsese wanted to make anything, he could just do it. But I do think, this could have been a Scorsese movie. I think this could have been a storyline that he picked. But I think he would have went deeper. He would have
definitely, yeah.
And like that. But that's what puts Scorsese and directors that are at that level, which there aren't many, where they take it to that level where all of a sudden there is depth. There is depth to this character. There is more than what is just being presented. Like you care, and you're like, why do I care about the villain? Because you learn about them. You get into their mindset. There's just something attractive about them that the director would present. But then what Rawson does is just like, here's this writing, and I think it comes from his communist background, and I think that is important to this story. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I'm saying that he had an agenda to fight against American politics and to push back a little bit, but I don't think that it successfully works at the end. So I think that the movie is what it is, and that's the unfortunate part, because it is a Best Picture winner, and you want something, and like it can be compelling, but it's not compelling enough. And for it being And I looked and I was telling you about this. There's not really another Best Picture winner that's that deep into politics, and this movie doesn't, again, like, do enough with politics, but this is about a political figure, and there's not really another one. I'm looking at the list, and I could be totally missing something, but I really don't think there's another movie where it's this political and it has this kind of political figure. The only thing I can think of is like a Lawrence of Arabia and the politics of the, of that era in the Middle East, but I don't think that does it enough to this kind of level. So
I think it's because it's so hard. Like, what story do you make about a politician? It's either a biopic just showing their life, the good, the bad, the ups, the downs, or it's something lasered focused, like a trial of the Chicago 7. It's about this one particular day and this trial that's all around that day. It's like so hard to make a film like that. Like, even a film like JFK, it's not really about JFK. It's about his assassination. It's about like this one moment in time with JFK, right? So I think it's just like really hard to make a film that's this big and like expanding, and it's not exactly about real life, but it's clearly about people and inspired by people from the real world. And I think that's what really, I think there's something to this that we're not seeing just because of, like we've talked about so much on this podcast, Trump, and how we've seen politics change with the 24/7 news cycle, and how much it's really manipulated itself into being not just news for politics' sake, but also entertainment itself. And I think watching this film in 1949, this, I think, would feel really ahead of its time, and it would, I think, question a lot of people, same way that John Wayne was so against this film, questioning their politics, question America. And at the time, we just got through World War II. It's to the point where you shouldn't question. You should settle down. We won the war. You should have kids. You should love America. We won. We're the greatest. We're the best there ever was. And this film is poking a stick at that. And I think there should be. I think like all films should exist. The bad, the good, the ugly. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, we should represent and show as many sides as possible, because that's what human beings are. We're very complex and emotional. I don't think this film does that exactly right, but I'm glad this exists. And I think for 1949, this was probably really ahead of its time, and it probably really impressed people, not technically, but of a story and how bold this is to do that. So, yeah, I'm glad it exists is basically what I'm trying to sum up.
Okay. I mean, I'm not gonna. I guess I'm glad that it exists, but I don't think that. Maybe I don't think. I don't know what I think about this movie.
Before we get off of it, talking about glad it exists, do you want to talk at all? I mean, we haven't seen the remake from 2006.
Oh yeah,
I believe it is, starring Sean Penn. But it's fascinating because I watched this movie and I'm like, that was pretty good. I could see that, like I've said on many episodes, being an amazing film. Like, I could really see this being so amazing and compelling if it was just really gritted down to its teeth, all about Willie Stark. You see this person kind of change and become someone else by the end, and how haunting it is. And it's related to a recent film, Nightmare Alley. I think it's very much in that same vein, and it makes me want to go back and watch that original Nightmare Alley. But yeah, what did you think about them remaking it? I mean, we looked at some of the reviews. We haven't watched it. It looks awful, and it sounds like all the reviews were actually hilarious to read. But yeah, what are your thoughts? And what do you think about Sean Penn as Willie Stark?
Yes, I watched the trailer for this 2006 remake of All the King's Men, which had Sean Penn in it. It had Jude Law, had Mark Ruffalo. I think it had Kate Winslet. James Gandolfini was in this movie.
Stacked, yeah.
It was Anthony Hopkins was in this movie too. So yeah, it's a very stacked cast. And then I watched the trailer for it, and I could not stop laughing, because it's this really bad, dumb Southern accent that Sean Penn puts on. The trailer is this is a man who thought he was a good man, and now he's bad. And it's there's nothing that you're really showing. And again, I think this lends more to why did Willie turn? There's no real reason besides I had a little too much to drink one day, and I was just a little too angry about it.
It's interesting because I think Sean Penn is just that's a horrible casting, in my opinion. I mean, we don't have to make Willie Stark the same character that he is in this or that he is in the novel. I think we know about his transformation as a human being. You can change that and make that different based on certain actors. But if you're trying to go for the original movie, I think Crawford is a huge guy. He's really towering, but at first he's this big, soft man, and there's something like endearing and sweet about that. And then it slowly kind of changes, and he uses his like force and his nature to become darker and to kind of stir up violence in people. So I just don't see that in Sean Penn. So just based on not even seeing the film and knowing that, like, he's just doesn't have that kind of same physical presence. He does have the extreme like heights, and he's really known for his yelling and his really extreme performances. So I think that's probably why he got the role, and maybe he was a fan of the original. But it's like a shame, like how this is a film that you could so easily adapt for any time, and I just don't think it should be. I feel the same way. I'm going to go off a little tangent for a second, but I feel the same way about West Side Story, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but we don't need to remake films exactly at the time they came out. Like, we can adapt stories because these stories should be good enough to adapt and change to the current perspective of the time. And I think that's what keeps stories alive. It keeps it more interesting, and it keeps it fresh, and it introduces more people to go see these films and love these films and love these continuously, not franchises, but remakes, I guess. You know, if you're going to remake a film, make it different, make it new, make it feel fresh for today's time. So it clearly felt that 2006 All the King's Men did not do that. Really wanted to like essentially remake the movie just because it was a Best Picture, it's a famous Hollywood movie. And yeah, that's my rant.
It's definitely a fair rant. So I think we should just jump right into the 22nd Academy Awards.
The 22nd Academy Awards were held on March 23rd, 1950 at the RKO Pantages Theater and awarded Oscars for the Best in Films of 1949. This year's show was hosted by Paul Douglas, and this was the first year in which every film nominated for Best Picture won multiple Oscars.
An Academy Juvenile Award went to Bobby Driscoll for his role in So Dear to My Heart and The Window. Driscoll was an American actor known for his film and television performances from 1943 to 1960. He starred in some of the Walt Disney Studios' best-known live-action pictures of the period, such as Song of the South, So Dear to My Heart, The Window, and Treasure Island.
Best foreign language film went to The Bicycle Thief, which is an Italian film, and the story is about a poor father searching post-World War II Rome for his stolen bicycle, without which he will lose his job, which was to be the salvation of his family. The film was also cited by Turner Classic Movies as one of the most influential films in cinema history.
Academy Honorary Awards went to Fred Astaire for his unique artistry and his contributions to the technique of musical pictures. Another one went to Cecile B. DeMille for a distinguished motion picture pioneer for 37 years of brilliant showmanship. It's crazy that DeMille had 37 years before this, and he hasn't even won his Oscar yet. And then there's also Gene Herschel for in recognition of his services to the Academy during 4 terms as the Academy president.
Best special effects went to Arco Production, RKO Radio for The Mighty Joe Young. Mighty Joe Young tells the story of a young woman, Jill Young, living on her father's ranch in Africa, who has raised a large gorilla from an infant and years later brings him to Hollywood seeking her fortune in order to save her family homestead. And I wanted to just kind of talk about the plot of this film because I love the 1998 Disney remake. It was one of my favorite movies growing up as a kid. It made me always love gorillas.
Is Brandon Fraser in that one?
Yes, he is.
Okay, that is what I'm thinking of.
Wait,
is he not?
Are you thinking of George of the Jungle? Now I need to double check.
Was he in both?
If he's in both, that would be insane. But I think you might be thinking of.
I know.
I haven't seen this movie in like maybe a decade or more. So
why do I feel like that Brendan Fraser was in Mighty Joe Young? But John's looking it up right now.
He's not. It's Bill Paxton. Is who
that's who it was.
Of. Yeah. With a young Charlize Theron.
Oh wow! Would you look at that? Moving on though to best film editing, I went to Harry W. Gerstad for Champion. Gerstad also won best film editing for High Noon in 1952. This picture recounts the struggles of boxer Midge, played by Kirk Douglas, fighting his own demons while working to achieve success in the boxing ring. Notably, All the King's Men was also nominated in this category. I'm surprised it was nominated in this category. Are you surprised, John? Do you think it might have deserved to win?
It's hard to say. I don't know if I could say it should deserve to win, but I think a lot of people credit, and I think Rawson is even quoted in crediting the editors kind of saving the film. Robert Parrish and Al Clark kind of being able to cut the film together from this really long length and creating a film that actually tells a story, whether you think it's that concise or not. So I think it's definitely worthy of being there. worthy of winning. I don't know if I would cross that section, but for me, it's the montages that I love the most.
It's funny that you bring up that specific point about saving it, because when you think of a movie like Bohemian Rhapsody, which won Best Editing because it was saved in the edit, it's like, but people hate that it won Best Film Editing.
Oh, people despise
yeah.
that.
So it's very interesting that the Academy has this history of recognizing when a project may have to have been saved in the edit and then giving its awards to that and complimenting it. I think I don't know what that says, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, I think it's like the editor's mindset and how much really editing is such an important factor in building a film that it really can change, or in this case, save a film. Best Costume Design Color goes to Leo Rhodes, William Travilla, and Marjorie Best. Travilla created one of the most famous costumes in all of film, the pleated ivory cocktail dress Marilyn Monroe wore in the 1955 film The 7-Year Itch. Monroe is wearing it while standing on a New York City subway ventilation grate. The dress rises up around her as the train passes below ground. Photographs of the scene have become synonymous with Monroe herself, and the iconic dress, which was later on purchased by actress Debbie Reynolds, sold for $4.6 million during an auction in 2011.
Best Costume Design Black and White went to Edith Head and Gail Steele for the movie The Heiress. It's Head's first of 8 total Oscars, which is a record in the costume design categories. Her 35 total nominations is a record as well. The win is the start of 3 consecutive wins for Head in the costume design category.
Best Cinematography Color goes to Winton C. Hoke for She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Hoke was a lab technician who contributed to the development of Technicolor before becoming a cinematographer in 1936. His Technicolor background quickly led him to be Hollywood's premier color cinematography, and what I thought was so fascinating is that Hoke never made a black and white film.
Best Cinematography Black and White went to Paul C. Vogel for Battleground. Vogel, an American cinematographer known for Angels in the Outfield, High Society, The Time Machine, and famously Lady in the Lake from 1947, which was completely shot from the point of view of the protagonist.
Best Art Direction, Set Direction Color goes to Cedric Gibbons and Paul Gross. Set direction by Edwin B. Willis and Jack D. Moore. This is another one for Cedric Gibbons and his 7th out of 11 for Best Art Direction wins. This is the 4th adaptation of Little Women and the 2nd sound version after the 1933 adaptation that starred Katharine Hepburn.
Best Art Direction, Set Decoration, Black and White went to John Meehan, Harry Horner, and Emil Curry for The Heiress. This is Meehan's first of 3 Oscar wins that also includes Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard and the 1944 adaptation of Jules Verne's classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is Horner and Curry's first of 2 career Oscar wins.
Best Sound Recording goes to Thomas T. Moulton for 12 O'Clock High. This is Moulton's 4th of 5 career Oscar wins. He previously won for The Hurricane in 1937, The Cowboy and the Lady from 1938, and The Snake Pit from 1948.
Best Original Song went to Baby It's Cold Outside from Neptune's Daughter, music and lyrics by Frank Losser. So in 1944, Losser wrote Baby It's Cold Outside to sing with his wife, Lynn Garland, at their housewarming party in New York City at the Navarro Hotel. They sang the song to indicate to guests that it was time to leave. Garland has written that after the first performance, quote, "We became instant parlor room stars. We got invited to all the best parties for years and on the basis of Baby. It was our ticket to caviar and truffles. Parties were built around our being the closing act." In 1948, after years of performing the song, Losser sold it to MGM for the 1949 romantic comedy Neptune's Daughter, which Garland was furious over, saying, "I felt as betrayed as if I'd caught him in bed with another woman." According to Esther Williams, the producers of Neptune's Daughter had planned to use a different Losser song, "I'd Like to Get You On a Slow Boat to China," but studio censors thought it was too suggestive and replaced it with Baby It's Cold Outside. So a little interesting background to what is a very popular song, but a very controversial song in today's world. One, just to back up a little bit, the fact that this song was written not for the movie, but yet still is the one that wins, is something that has always bothered me, because there's so many times when songs are in movies and don't get recognition because they were from something previously, but that song may be important to that film and how it was used. So I digress there. But Baby It's Cold Outside has this huge controversy now because of the date rape vibes it has with it, but also it's a really good back and call and receive song that is good for duet. So one, I assume you like the song Baby It's Cold Outside. I mean, it's a very catchy song, but also the suggestive nature of it and the controversy behind it. How does that make you feel knowing that it's also won an Academy Award?
I don't care. I honestly think this is one of those things that is so overblown. Like, yes, the song is about like her constantly wanting to leave, but this is like, it's the whole point of the song. It's about how much they love each other and how he wants her to stay. Yes, the lyrics imply very aggressive and kind of very like overhandsy men like controlling a woman. Yes, I understand that, but that's clearly not the intention of the song. You can read as much as you wanted to into it, but what I found really interesting, this is like kind of a synonymous song for holiday films. It's funny, we didn't really mention too much about music in our holiday special, but this is one of the most iconic holiday songs of all time. I think of one of my favorite parts of it in Elf when they sing each other and she's singing in the shower. Like, that's such a great moment together, and I think it also plays in how people find this song to be kind of creepy in that film, so it's a little bit meta there. And the last little note for this song, if you have Netflix, I know you do, I don't really recommend watching this film or going out of your way, but if you're into a good rom-com, it's already past the holidays, but there's a movie called Love Hard that came out recently on Netflix that actually takes this song and like aggressively changes it to be very equal. Like, he's like urging her to like go home, basically, which is it's actually a really funny scene, and they do a really funny job of modernizing the lyrics. So check it out or watch that scene on YouTube. Best scoring of a musical picture goes to Roger Edens and Lenny Hayden for On the Town. This is Eden's second consecutive win after Easter Parade in 1948, and he would go on to win the following year for Annie, Get Your Gun in 1950. This is Hayden's first of two wins. He would go on to win for Hello Dolly in 1969, and he was also nominated for Singing in the Rain in 1952.
Best scoring of a dramatic or comedy picture goes to Aaron Copland for The Heiress.
Best live-action short subject 2 reel goes to Gaston Deal and Robert Hessens for Van Gogh.
Best live-action short subject 1 reel goes to Jack Eaton for Aquatic House Party.
Best documentary short subject goes to we have a tie here. We have A Chance to Live and also the winner, So Much for So Little. This is the second time in Oscar history where a category resulted in a tie. The first time being only in the 5th Academy Awards when Frederick March won for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Wallace Beery won for The Champ. That's interesting. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, why would a documentary be the one that is kind of split? In a short documentary, too.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's much of an explanation behind that, really.
No, I don't. I couldn't figure it out, but this is pretty unique.
Just by chance, I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, just having a tie as part of, you know, I think it's interesting when there is ties, and I actually feel like it'd be great if there were more ties. Like, could you imagine if, like, last year...
If it happened, like, nowadays?
Yeah, if it, like, happened, like, people, like, especially in an acting category, people would be shitting themselves.
Well, no one would believe it. Everyone would be like, this is bullshit. Like, they clearly just... No, this is not right.
Yeah.
So it would be so controversial no matter what it would be. I mean, if it was like a random sound category or something that people don't really care that much about, I don't think people would...
But that happened. That happened in 2012 in a sound category.
Yeah.
Didn't it, with what, Skyfall?
I don't remember this ever happening.
I'm pretty sure Skyfall. I'm gonna look this up right now, but I am more than positive that Skyfall tied with another film in the best sound category.
I think people would just be outraged with like a major category, whether it's like an acting or a best picture,
right,
or like a directing, something that's like a large category where there are favorites and there are people that want certain people to win. I just don't think anyone would ever believe that there would be a tie.
Yeah, so I'm almost there. Finding this fun fact, there's a lot you have to look up and have to remember for all the years. But yes, best sound editing, Skyfall and Zero Dark 30 tied for the 85th Academy Awards for the movies that came out in 2012. So like that probably that's probably fine and all that. I don't obviously no one really gives that much of shit. But yeah, if it wasn't acting, a directing category, best picture, people would lose their minds over it.
Cause outrage.
Moving on though to best documentary feature, went to Daybreak in Udai.
Best animated short film goes to For Sentimental Reasons. This is a Pepe Le Pew starring short film from the Looney Tunes. First Chuck Jones directed cartoon and the second Warner Brothers cartoon to win this award after Tweety Pie won in 1947.
Pepe Le Pew.
Did I say that wrong?
No, I'm just.
Oh, okay.
I just love saying Pepe Le Pew.
I'm so used to being like a correction from you being like, no, that's how it's pronounced.
No, but Pepe Le Pew.
Well, who was supposed to be in HBO Max's Space Jam 2, but was cut out. I don't know if you read that story, but
no,
that's
wait,
for another time.
Why? No, hold on. That's exactly what this whole thing is about. Why was he cut out?
I might be getting this partially wrong, but it was a very sexually suggestive scene. But it was, well, he's always really sexualized, right? He's always like super horny, but they never really directly say that.
He's Pepe Le Pew.
But he's very horny all the time. And it was supposed to be making fun at that and how someone was going to like shoot him down and basically like give Pepe Le Pew a talking and being like, what you're doing is wrong. Basically like people would have like hated this so much if they'd done it. Like the woke mobsters or the I don't even know what to call them. But people would have like really, really gotten pissed over this. But I don't know. It sounds like a funny little joke about how Pepe Le Pew's always horny. I don't know. But yeah, it was basically just kind of commenting on that.
One of the best movies of modern era.
Yes.
Moving on to Best Motion Picture Story, went to The Stratton Story to Douglas Morrow. This is an American biographical film directed by Sam Wood, which tells the true story of Monty Stratton, a Major League Baseball pitcher who pitched for the White Sox from 1934 to 1938. This is the first of 3 movies that paired stars Jimmy Stewart and June Allison, the others being The Glenn Miller Story and Strategic Air Command. Stratton commented that Mr. Stewart did a great job of playing me in a picture, which I figure was about as true to life as they could make it. However, there is one inaccuracy about the film. The movie depicts Stratton's MLB debut on a different day and a different result. So maybe not as accurate as you thought, Mr. Stratton.
You friggin' baseball nerd. Yeah, I thought you'd find that interesting.
Oh, yeah, very interesting. And do you know like what the story is about and like kind of what happens at the end of Stratton's life?
No, you can totally spoil it for me. This I always wanted to like compile a list on Letterboxd of baseball films. So, but tell me, spoil it for me.
So what happens is Stratton, he shot himself in the leg by accident.
What?
Yeah, so he had to get his leg amputated.
What?
So he got his leg amputated. Couldn't play baseball for a long time. So the movie kind of
the fuck?
It like ends. It doesn't end on that, but it's like sort of about that. But what happens is he's able to pitch like in a minor league game with his amputated leg. So it's it's pretty crazy, right?
Like and he's standing, like, or
I think he had like a prosthetic leg. Wow. Yeah, but so imagine Jimmy Stewart playing this role.
I just like can't imagine. Like the scene where he shoots himself has to be funny. Like now, like looking back
right.
on it, like there's no way they play that. That's got to be such a hard scene to even make. Like someone shooting themselves. Like how is that? I don't know. I feel like now that just reminds me of like stupid YouTube videos of people like mishandling guns. You know what I mean? Like that's crazy that actually happened.
Yeah.
I like literally thought you were gonna tell me something like so simple. I was not expecting.
Oh no.
I was not expecting that at all. That's definitely gonna stick with me now. Best Story and Screenplay goes to Robert Penn for Battleground. This is an American war film that follows a company in the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, as they cope with the siege of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. This film was directed by William Wellman, who directed the first Best Picture winner, Wings.
Best Screenplay went to A Letter to Three Wives, written by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, from Letter to Five Wives by John Klempner. This is Mankiewicz's first of 4 Academy Awards and first of the 22nd ceremony. So actually, when we're talking about movies and compiling lists, I bought this movie, bought it digitally to watch because I thought that this alone was interesting. And the log line of the movie tells the story of a woman who mails a letter to 3 women telling them she has left town with the husband of one of them. That sounded really interesting to me, so I bought that movie. It's like $10 on Apple TV. And this is not to go into like a big rant right now, but I'm just saying there are some great movies that Apple and like iTunes has for really cheap. And if you really want to just explore and go for depth, just pay the $10. Pay the $3.99 of rented, whatever. Good content. Yeah, it's going to Apple. It's going to these big studios, but it's definitely worth it to watch some of these old movies. So I definitely take the opportunity. If like Apple has it, I'll buy it. It's worth the $10.
This is the episode of Rants. I love it.
We're in that Willie Stark mindset.
Yeah, I'm just going to start calling everybody Hicks. Best Supporting Actress goes to Mercedes McCambridge for All the King's Men as Sadie Burke.
And here, ladies and gentlemen, is one of those affairs and one of those things that can only happen at an Oscar affair. Down the aisle, dressed beautifully in white, is coming a young lady who, for her first screen role, receives one of the coveted and highest awards that this our industry can give. And now I might add that we are to that tense point in the Academy presentations. She's approaching the mic.
I'm aware of those who have contributed to this moment and thankful for them. But I would like to say to every waiting actor, hold on. Look what can happen. Thank you very much.
McCambridge began her career on the radio as an actress in the 1930s while also performing on Broadway. Described by Orson Welles as the world's greatest living radio actress, her film debut in All the King's Men earned her the Academy Award, becoming only a handful of actors to win an Oscar in their film debut. Her career highlights include her supporting role in Giant in 1956, and of course the voice of the demon in The Exorcist from 1973. To sound as disturbing as possible, McCambridge insisted on swallowing raw eggs, chain smoking, and drinking whiskey to make her voice harsh and her performance aggressive. Director William Friedkin also arranged for her to be bound to a chair during recordings, so that the demon seemed to be struggling against its restraints. Friedkin claimed that she initially requested no credit for the film, fearing it would be taken away from the attention of Blair's performance, but later complained about her absence of credit during the film's premiere. Her dispute with Friedkin and the Warner Brothers over her exclusion ended when, with the help of Screen Actors Guild, she was properly credited for her vocal work in the film. I'm assuming she probably didn't expect this movie to be as amazing and phenomenal as it is, and especially how remembered it is. But yeah, that's something I actually didn't even know. I didn't really even realize. I always assumed it was the same actress doing that voice, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, I just thought it was cool because you're watching this young actress, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, and she was the voice of Pazuzu in The Exorcist. You're like, hold on a second,
what?
That's interesting. And then reading how they did that performance, I thought was really horrifying and like torturous, but also like really fascinating, and like that's how you should make the voice of Pazuzu.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Yeah, good on Mercedes McCambridge. Didn't have this like big Hollywood career, but to win an Academy Award is a feat in and of itself, and to be in, again, like one of the most popular horror movies of all time is another great feat. So
definitely
good job, Mercedes McCambridge. But I guess this is also the point where we say, is this performance worthy or not? I think we sort of answered that before. I'm a little on the fence. You seem to be a little bit more like, yeah, she was like good in this performance.
I definitely think she's worthy of being nominated, but I don't know. For me, when you're talking about specific awards, especially for characters and for acting awards, I want the character to be interesting and engaging and to have something kind of more fleshed out. And I just think her character, Sadie Burke, just doesn't get the full like oomph. She has some great scenes. Again, it's like the scenes that you would play at the Oscar ceremony of her yelling, she's getting slapped. Like there's really emotion to it. But then that emotion doesn't really get carried throughout the film. But I mean, props to her. She was like up against Ethel Barrymore, Celeste Holm. Like she was up against some all-time greats, and it's quite impressive to win, especially on a debut.
Moving on to Best Supporting Actor, went to Dean Jagger for 12 O'Clock High as Major Harvey Stovall. This is Jagger's only career win and Oscar nomination. In the film, he played the retread World War I veteran, middle-aged adjutant Major/Lieutenant Colonel Harvey Stovall, who acts as an advisor to the commander, General Savage, who is played by Gregory Peck. This movie was selected by the Preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Best Actress goes to Olivia de Havilland for The Heiress. This is de Havilland's second and final career win. She previously won for To Each His Own in 1946. After seeing the play on Broadway, de Havilland called Wyler and urged him to fly to New York to see what she felt would be a perfect role for her. Wyler, obligated, loved the play, and with de Havilland's help, arranged for Paramount to secure the film's rights. Throughout the production, Wyler pressed de Havilland hard to elicit the requisite visual points of the characters. When Catherine returns home after being jilted, the director had the actress carry a suitcase filled with heavy books up the stairs to convey the weight of Catherine's trauma physically instead of using a planned speech in the original script. This is definitely a film I'm going to throw on my to-watch list because you got Weiler, you got Haviland. Come on, this sounds fantastic.
Yeah, this is, in a few episodes ago when we have a lot more info, we've talked a lot about Olivia de Havilland, so she's getting her second win, and it's just really, it's pretty amazing where her career was. This was not the end of it, but this is like kind of the end of the high pinnacle point of her career. She had like a stretch of 4 films, beginning with To Each His Own. So, winning 2 Oscars within a 3 or 4 year period is pretty remarkable. Moving on to Best Actor goes to Broderick Crawford for All the King's Men as Willie Stark.
If my heart would stop beating for a minute. Mr. Douglas said I was to thank nobody. I'd like to thank all of you, and especially thank God.
Broderick Crawford gained early recognition as Lenny in the original Broadway production of Mice and Men in 1937. He was primarily known as a B-film actor, and Crawford made his debut in Samuel Goldwyn's Women Chases Man in 1937. His role in All the King's Men proved to be the pinnacle of his career, earning his only Oscar win and nomination. So we've sort of alluded to it, and this film could have been offered to many people. Actually, he's competing against John Wayne in this category, so it's funny that John Wayne turned down the role. It could have earned him an Oscar. But he also went against Gregory Peck and Kirk Douglas, so some big swingers for the time that Broderick Crawford was going against, and for being a B-film actor, it's pretty remarkable that he was able to ascend that quickly. I think that we both find that this performance was pretty good, and just that the movie itself didn't lend enough hand to like what could have been more, but probably could have been more memorable,
Yeah, I thought it was pretty phenomenal. I think you could really see the difference of his character from beginning to end, which was really fascinating, and you really see like the anger and the fierce frustration in him when he's giving these big rally speeches and when he's like really loses sight of who he was. And you can also see him as like this like farm man in the beginning who's like this lovely man who just enjoys his town and enjoys his family, and you can really see that kind of deteriorate in him. So I really love that performance, and totally is worthy in my book here. Best Director goes to Joseph L. Mankiewicz for A Letter to Three Wives. This is Mankiewicz's second career Oscar and Oscar of the Evening. He would go on to win another pair of directing and writing Oscars at the 23rd Academy Awards for the 1950 Best Picture winner, All About Eve. All the King's Men won the Directors Guild of America Award for Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Motion Pictures in 1950. The previous year's ceremony in 1949 was the very first in the Guild's history. For the 1949 awards, the DGA had used a non-calendar year honoring films released in both 1948 and early 1949, unlike the Academy Awards. Both the 1949 and 1950 DGA winners, A Letter to Three Wives and All the King's Men, respectively, competed for the 1950 Academy Award for Best Director, which was awarded to Joseph L. Mankiewicz for the former listed movie. This explains why the heavily favored Robert Rossen did not win for directing this film at the Oscars. However, the film, of course, was awarded Best Picture.
Yeah, it's certainly fascinating, and I think that next episode, when we talk about All About Eve, we'll dive deeper into Mankiewicz's career and give more of his due. But I think that knowing that the two movies went against each other, and the DGA awarded both films that award, and so maybe they're like, okay, well, which one do we like more? Like, maybe I like Mankiewicz more, like Rossen type of thing. And it could have just been a popularity contest at that point. But to know that Rossen didn't win because of the DGA makes it seem like that I was missing something with this movie, that if Mankiewicz wasn't competing, that Rossen would have won this award. So it makes me feel like different ways about it. But what do you think? Do you think that Rossen should have won, without seeing Mankiewicz's direction? But do you think, watching All the King's Men, do you think he probably could have won Best Director or should have won it?
Yeah, he's up against Weiler here again and a couple other greats. But I don't know. I talked about how I felt like he was kind of ahead of his game with this kind of directorial style that felt very much like a documentary. It felt like straight out of like a newsreel, which isn't always the best for a fiction film, but I found it kind of ahead of its time and really interesting. So I could totally see it him being worthy, definitely.
And finally, the Best Motion Picture category, the nominees are 12 O'Clock High, A Letter to Three Wives, The Heiress, Battleground, and our winner of the 1949 Best Picture Award is All the King's Men, going to Robert Rawson for Columbia Pictures. So Rawson winning for being a producer, director, and writer is pretty significant, but him only taking the Best Picture Award is also significant of itself. But before we give our final reactions to All the King's Men, let's give some stats and figures, because that's what we love on Worthy. So the Rotten Tomatoes percentage gives us a 95% of an average Rotten Tomatoes rating by critics is an 8.2. Top critics give it an 89% fresh rating with an average rating of 8.8. The audience score is a 78% with an average of 3.81. IMDb gives it a 7.5. It won 3 Academy Awards out of 7 total nominations. John, what did you give All the King's Men?
I gave All the King's Men a 72. Talked pretty heavily about probably why I'm probably more positive on this than Ben is. Mainly for me, the issues where it was kind of like murky, a little muddy in terms of its overall construction, jumping from scene to scene, was kind of loose at times. But overall, I found centering this all about Stark's character with a little bit of Jack kind of thrown in. He's another weak element for me, but I found the story really interesting and compelling about this downfall of a man, and ending the film on his murder like that I felt was pretty bold, and I felt the overall style was kind of significant for its time. So that's why I gave it a kind of higher score than what you may have thought.
Yeah, I gave this movie a 65. That's the original score I gave it when I watched it at this point 2 years ago, which is kind of weird to think about being on this journey of all the Best Picture winners. But giving it a 65, I think it's just this movie has some merit. I think the writing is the strongest part, and for me, that's like a huge chunk of what makes a movie good. Is it of the what it could present, but then I also have so many faults with so many other aspects of it that it brings it down. But then Broderick Crawford's performance is really good, but then every other person's performance is really down. So for me, it falls into like you pass, but you don't really pass that much. Like it's not a failure of a movie where it could have been. So sitting in that D range for me, a 65 felt appropriate. So right now, out of 22 movies that we have watched, John, your average rating is a 70.3. and mine is a 76.1. So we're still sitting in like the 70 range, and that's because of some down movies. But I'm looking forward to where we are going to be going in the 50s. But before we even get into that, is All the King's Men worthy of the Best Picture Award in 1949?
I'm going to say yes. I kind of debated this to myself back and forth, and I'm going to land on yes. Because of the lead performance, because I think the story is interesting. It's pushing back at America at a time that's so Americana. I think it's deserving of to being kind of categorized and as a kind of point in history.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have to. I disagree. I get what you're saying, but I think this movie just really it's just another movie. I think it just exists, and I don't think that it adds really any merit to, again, the collective of Best Picture winners that are really great. I don't think it has a strong message. I think that it has a great acting performance, but I think that doesn't make it worthy enough to be considered one of the best of all time when you think about Best Picture movies. And I just think that it just doesn't fit for me, and it fails in those aspects. So I don't think it's worthy. Still won Best Picture, so you take that, for what it is. So I think there's still a lot to say about this movie, but I think we've also covered a lot of it as well. So any final thoughts on All the King's Men, and any thoughts on moving forward into the 1950s, a new decade of cinema for us to explore?
I just got to say I love my Hicks, boy.
Oh, my God. I mean, to each their own, right? To each their own. So anyway, so tune in for the next episode. We got a really good one in All About Eve, a classic that a lot of people love, so you definitely don't want to miss that. I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And this is Worthy.
Thanks very much, all of you very, very nice people. You've met the new royal family of Hollywood. May they reign mightily for a year and a day. Bless you all.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, so concludes the 22nd Annual Academy Awards show, and it rounds out our ABC coverage of this great spectacle. Recapitulate just once more for you. Best Actress Award went to Olivia Havilland, the Best Actor to Broderick Crawford, the Best Supporting Actress to Mercedes McCambridge, the Best Supporting Actor to Dean Jager, and the Best Picture to All the King's Men. I certainly want my stalwart cohorts here this evening to say good night to you. And first of all, here's Miss Eve Arden.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. It was terribly exciting doing this. It was a lot of fun. I only wish I could have described some of the beautiful gowns I saw tonight. I was drooling. But it was a little difficult. We didn't quite have time enough. Now Ronnie Reagan wants to say good night to you.
Yes, and you know, Ken, if you'll pardon a personal reference, sitting up here looking out through this glass window has taken me back to some years ago when I was a radio sports announcer.
Yes, sir.
And this used to be the stage of a big, thrilling football game when you'd say the long blue shadows are settling over the field, the teams have left. You'd give the statistics in the game. And I don't know of any game that I ever broadcast that was any more exciting or thrilling than this, when once in a while Hollywood gets to show a world, and a world of detractors in many cases, that we're a hard-working and a very serious community and a fine industry made up of very many fine, generous people. It's been a pleasure to be here with you and a pleasure to be on the air and participate in this particular 22nd annual award. Good night.
Now listen to me, you hicks. Yeah, you're hicks too, and they fooled you 1,000 times just like they fooled me. But this time I'm going to fool somebody. I'm going to stay in this race. I'm on my own and I'm out for blood. Now listen to me, you hicks. Listen to me and lift up your eyes and look at God's blessed and unfly-blown truth. And this is the truth. You're a hick. And nobody ever helped a hick but a hick himself. All right, listen to me. I'm the hick they were going to use to split the hick vote. But I'm standing right here now on my hind legs. Even a dog can learn to do that. Are you standing on your hind legs? Have you learned to do that much yet? Here it is. Here it is, you hicks. Nail up anybody who stands in your way. Nail up Joe Harrison. Nail up McMurphy. And if they don't deliver, give me the hammer and I'll do it myself.
Thanks for listening to Worthy, the breakdown of every Best Picture winner from past to present. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram at Worthy Podcast, on Twitter at Worthy Pod, and on Facebook at Worthy Podcast. Any inquiries can be submitted to worthysubmissions@gmail.com. Again, that's worthysubmissions@gmail.com.